How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to our Bogans Guide to the World. New Zealand's a pretty strange country. We're right in the middle of nowhere. Most of the people in the world don't know about us, and most of the world maps happen to leave New Zealand off it. So today we're taking a deep dive into the weirdest laws of New Zealand that you probably never even heard of. So fasten your seatbelts, folks, because we're about to take a wild ride into the strange laws of New Zealand. Alright, so first on our list, let's talk about lost property. Did you know that here in New Zealand, offering a reward for no question asked could cost you or the person helping you retrieve the item a cool $200 fine? It's meant to deter theft by making it harder for criminals to offload stolen goods. But let's be honest, the only thing this law is deterring is common sense. If I found a wallet stuffed with cash, do you really think I'm going to return it knowing that I could be fined for respecting the owner's privacy? Okay, let's talk about drugs, man.
Specifically, let's jump into the curious case of New Zealand drug laws. Here in New Zealand, growing, selling or possessing cannabis can land you in some pretty serious trouble. The police are always on the lookout for illegal growing operations, and raids are not uncommon. But possessing a book about cannabis requires another level of criminal mastermindery. You may think that reading a book about cannabis is harmless, but think again, my sweet impressionable viewer, think again. Possessing an objectionable publication like the Everything Marijuana book can carry a higher maximum sentence than actual cultivation and distribution of some jazz cabbage. Yep, you heard that right. This book can be more dangerous in the eyes of the law than the plant itself. We're talking up to 10 years behind bars for owning a simple book. Imagine spending a decade in prison for owning some light reading material. Meanwhile, Baz from down the road only gets a slap on the wrist for growing 10 Gorilla Glue clones in his crawl space. It's enough to make you wonder if our government has things completely backwards or if something else is at play with these drug policies.
Alright, let's get really weird now.
Have you ever thought about the power of your words and how they can influence, inspire, or even hurt someone deeply? Imagine you're having a heated argument and your words pierce someone's soul. Tragically, they have a heart attack from being overly sensitive and die from being offended to death. Now that sounds like something pretty dramatic, right? But what if I told you that this scenario has real-world applications? In most countries, you'd face some pretty serious charges. You could be looking at manslaughter or even murder charges depending on the circumstances. But here in good old New Zealand, according to the Crimes Act of 1961, you're not responsible if your actions affect the mind alone of the deceased. This means if your words alone cause someone to die, you wouldn't be held legally accountable. Killing someone with your words is perfectly legal as long as they're not sick or a child. This legal loophole was fascinating and somewhat controversial and has caused debate and has even popped up into multiple court cases over the years. So if you're visiting New Zealand, choose your words pretty carefully because you never know the power they may hold.
So now let's talk about money.
In New Zealand, we're pretty slow with change, and some fines seem like they're stuck in a time warp. Take the maximum fine for failing to file the annual accounts for an incorporated society. The fine is still 1 shilling per day, which is about 5 cents in today's money. So if you avoid filing your accounts for a whole year, your punishment will be an eye-watering $18.25. You'd spend more than that on a parking ticket alone in Wellington. It's enough to make you wonder if these fines are even pursued.
Now let's move on to something a little more explosive.
So here in New Zealand, it's illegal to possess even a single atom of uranium without immediately reporting it to the authorities. If you fail to report where you found it, you could land in some pretty hot water. This law is another example to the better safe than sorry approach to legislation. Nuclear weapons are bad news, man, and here in New Zealand they take it pretty serious.
Let's talk about art for a minute.
Did you know that defacing a banknote here in New Zealand is a pretty serious crime? Scribbling on, writing on, drawing on, or otherwise defacing Her Majesty's face on your hard-earned $20 note could cost you a cool $1,000 fine. Even Taika Waititi fell victim to this particular law during an art project in his university days. So next time you have the urge to draw a phallus on Ernest Rutherford or devil horns on the Queen, think twice, because no one's above the law.
This is going to be pretty controversial. Let's talk about immigration.
Oh no. Did you know New Zealand can actually deny you residency based on your weight? The government blames obesity-related illness to the rising healthcare costs. So they implemented a policy which allows them to deny residency visas based on individuals they deemed likely to impose significant demands on our healthcare system. One of the factors that they use is the BMI, or body mass index. This policy is not without controversy. Some praise the bill as a way to protect the public health system, while others call it fat shaming and discrimination.
Property rights.
Did you know that the 1908 Auckland-Manukau Canal Act gives the authorities the power to confiscate your land? Even though the canal was never built and the act hasn't been used to seize land in decades, this law is still technically enforceable. So somewhere in New Zealand there's a politician with a dusty old map and a gleam of greed in his eye waiting for the opportunity to declare eminent domain on your prime seafront section.
Now, you remember that little no uranium rule? Let's talk about that again.
Well, did you know that New Zealand's relationship with radioactive materials is a little more complicated? High schools can have up to 1 pound of uranium for educational purposes, but letting old Timmy accidentally set off a nuclear explosion is still very much illegal and often frowned upon, so a fine for such an indiscretion is a cool $1 million. New Zealand's pretty cool with allowing kids to play around with a small amount of uranium, but if they open a portal to a black hole, you could face a pretty hefty fine. If we're still around, that is.
Let's talk about nature for a minute.
Here in New Zealand, even the rivers have rights. Did you know that the Wanganui River was granted the same rights as a human being? The decision recognises the river's profound spiritual and cultural significance to the people of New Zealand. It sets an impressive precedence to the importance of nature and why we should be doing way more to protect them.
Alright, so let's talk about your free speech.
Did you know that here in New Zealand, using indecent language or making obscene suggestions over the phone could land you in some pretty serious trouble? This law is basically the legal equivalent of your nana waving her finger at you and saying, "Mind your manners." But instead of a stern talking to, you could be facing a fine, legal action, or even some jail time. There have even been some cases where people have been prosecuted because of their phone conversations. So be careful the next time a telemarketer calls you at the wrong time.
Right folks, let's wrap up this list with a little trip into the paranormal.
So here in New Zealand we have a pretty unique stance when it comes to psychic phenomena. Claiming to have psychic powers is all fun and games until someone tries to make a living out of it, and we have pretty strict laws to prevent people from being misled. People claiming to be clairvoyant or have psychic powers with the intent to deceive is a big no-no, and authorities take those claims pretty seriously, especially if there's intent to defraud or manipulate others. So the punishment for such psychic shenanigans is a fine of up to $1,000. This is a pretty hefty penalty, and it serves as a deterrent to prevent charlatans and con artists from ripping off people who may be vulnerable from people who are claiming to be psychics just for a little bit of cash.
Right folks, so that was my list of New Zealand's most weirdest laws you probably never even heard of. If you got something out of this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. You subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with more videos like this. See you in the next one, eh?